I'm Matt Lassiter. I'm a professor of history at the University of Michigan and a specialist in 20th century American political and urban history, and the director of the Environmental Justice History Lab. Earth Day happened on April 22nd, 1970, but it actually began in its planning phase in the fall of 1969. And Senator Gaylord Nelson of Wisconsin put out a call for environmental teach-ins in 1970 based on the anti-Vietnam War teach-ins that had happened in 1965. And at the same time, a group of University of Michigan graduate students in the sciences started an effort to plan an environmental teach-in here at the University of Michigan. And that converged into the University of Michigan's ENACT teach-in. Environmental Action for Survival was the name of their group, which happened in March of 1970, about 6 weeks before the National Earth Day mobilization on April 22nd. ENACT is Environmental Action for Survival. It came together in October and November of 1969. It was mainly graduate students in the School of Natural Resources here at the University of Michigan, the School of Public Health and Biology and other sciences. And they began to feel that they had to do something about the ecological crisis, the crisis of water and air pollution. This was really in the air in the late 1960s. And so they asked the University of Michigan President Fleming for funding, and he gave them some funding. Then they went and raised money from a whole range of groups, from the United Auto Workers to General Motors and even Dow Chemical. Ford Motor Company gave them money. And so they were planning a teach-in, which would be a big event. And that was happening on a parallel track to the national planning for a big environmental action movement, which became Earth Day. And so these students reached out into the community. They got a lot of Ann Arbor community members, high schools, elementary schools even, involved, and they really pulled off an incredible undertaking for a group of students who were kind of flying by the seat of their pants. They planned a 4-day event. It had hundreds of panels, workshops, protests, and demonstrations. They had a keynote kickoff rally with Senator Gaylord Nelson of Wisconsin, who was really the architect of the National Earth Day. Barry Commoner, a famous biologist and ecologist, who was talking about the problems of what we would call environmental racism today, the particular pollution crisis in the inner cities and African American communities. They had the musical cast of Hair. They had folk singer Gordon Lightfoot, who came, and that's just the kickoff rally. Earlier that day, so this is earlier on March 11th, they had a trial of a car, a Ford. Even though Ford had given them money, they put a Ford sedan on trial and executed it with sledgehammers on the diag on Central Campus. They gathered 10,000 non-returnable aluminum cans and dumped them on the front lawn of the Coca-Cola bottling plant. And then over the next 3 days, there were an incredible series of events. There was a day dedicated to population control, which was really a major part of the Earth Day movement that we don't talk about a lot anymore. All sorts of college students signed pledges that they would not have more than 2 children to contribute to the reaching a more sustainable population level and how they thought about it. There was an amazing panel that was held at Pioneer High School called The Roots of the Environmental Crisis. The president of Dow Chemical spoke and also got heckled by the crowd because Dow was seen as an environmental polluter and a problem, especially because of the use of napalm, a herbicide in Vietnam. Walter Reuther of the United Auto Workers was there, and he basically said, I'm not sure these problems can be solved within the existing framework of capitalism. We need to change our market values. We need really tough regulations on government and on corporations. And then on the final day, they had a walk along the Huron River here in Ann Arbor, a local river, where a lot of elementary school students marched protesting water pollution. They were joined by David Brower, who was a famous head of the Sierra Club, and he had just formed a new group called Friends of the Earth, among many other people. They had a big final series of events on the fourth day. Ralph Nader, the famous, at the time, consumer advocate, gave a speech about the evils of corporate America and how they had to be restrained. And then they had a big panel about the Vietnam War and how it was connected to environmentalism. And the final event was called Man's Struggle for Survival. And the most important speech came from the mayor of Gary, Indiana, Richard Hatcher, an African American, who talked about how the environmental movement could not just be middle-class suburban people who wanted parks and hiking, but it had to be about the whole ecological problem, especially concentrated pollution in urban centers.